In the final hours before everything unraveled, a quiet sense of unease began to creep in, as a mother's voice carried both fear and urgency, insisting something was terribly wrong while questions hung heavy in the air about Ashley, last seen in the company of someone no one fully trusted. And as investigators would later piece together the scene, there were disturbing signs, blood, fragments, and the unthinkable reality that parts of a body were missing, scattered, discarded, as if someone had tried to erase the truth. Yet video footage told a different story, showing two people together, laughing, appearing completely at ease, with no hint of the horror that was about to unfold. And as technology captured their final known moments, it became clear these recordings would be crucial, silently holding answers no one was prepared to face. While Ashley herself had always been cautious, hesitant to trust strangers, shaped by her mother's constant warnings about the dangers of the online world. Yet somehow she had formed a connection, one that felt safe, familiar, even special, leading her to believe meeting in person was the natural next step. Because Ashley loved deeply her friends, her family, her life as a college student stepping into new experiences. And in what should have been an ordinary day, she casually mentioned getting ready for class, her words light, her tone normal, never suggesting it would be one of the last times anyone would hear her voice that way. And as time passed without response, concern turned into alarm when calls and messages went unanswered. Something completely out of character, triggering a mother's instinct that refused to be ignored, even as others initially dismissed it as nothing more than a missed call or a busy schedule. But Christine knew better, sensing immediately that something was not right, recalling that Ashley had gone out that Wednesday night, and while technically no crime had been reported, no official disappearance declared, the silence spoke volumes, prompting deeper conversations with friends that revealed a troubling name from the past, Jared, a man once connected to a break-in at Ashley's apartment, someone with a questionable history and known struggles. Yet despite warnings, Ashley had believed in second chances, convinced there was good in everyone, and that belief led her to him that night, when she traveled to Grand Rapids, to an address on Franklin where Jared lived. The two later seen at a local bar, Mulligan's, and briefly captured again on surveillance near the Pita House next door, where in a fleeting clip, Ashley's distinctive knee-high black boots marked her presence as she followed behind Jared, the two appearing casual, ordinary, like any young couple enjoying a night out, talking in a parking lot, unaware, or perhaps only one of them unaware, of what was coming next. And when Christine reached out, leaving a voicemail filled with urgency and rising anger, demanding answers, promising action, Jared eventually responded with a story that quickly unraveled, claiming Ashley had lost her phone and was on her way home. Explanations that felt hollow, inconsistent, each word raising more suspicion than comfort, as he attempted to redirect attention elsewhere, even naming another person, Demetrius, in a desperate attempt to shift blame. But that story collapsed almost immediately when Demetrius denied ever knowing Ashley, exposing the cracks in Jared's narrative. And in that moment, as panic set in behind the scenes, his own words to a friend revealed the truth closing in, a realization that whatever had happened that night could no longer stay hidden. As the hours turned into days, the tension only deepened, with confusion giving way to a growing sense of dread when it became clear that even those who could have helped were missing critical pieces of the truth. And when he finally responded, it was too late. He hadn't even seen the message that might have changed everything, leaving a mother grasping for answers as Friday morning arrived in a haze so heavy it felt as though time itself had simply stopped, frozen in that unbearable moment where nothing made sense. And by Saturday, the urgency could no longer be contained, as determination replaced waiting, pushing them toward Grand Rapids, toward Jared's home, toward any place that might hold a clue, because it felt like no one else was moving fast enough. And what followed became a grassroots search fueled by desperation and a mother's refusal to give up, her voice echoing across social media as the story spread, catching the attention of those who knew more than they were saying, including Jared's own father, a man with decades in law enforcement who understood exactly what was unfolding. And when he walked into the police department with his son, the atmosphere shifted as questions were met with defensiveness, requests for attorneys raised barriers, and frustration spilled over into a tense confrontation that ended with a warning, one that would soon prove prophetic as they turned and walked out, leaving behind more suspicion than clarity. And then, in a moment that would change everything, a call came in, a voice on the line describing a terrible feeling, a discovery in a basement, something wrapped, something leaking, something no one wanted to imagine but couldn't ignore. And as officers responded, it became clear this was no ordinary concern because the neighbor had gone searching for a simple explanation, a smell, a possible plumbing issue, but instead found a tarp at the bottom of the stairs, something seeping from beneath it, something that looked like blood. An instinct told him not to touch it, not to uncover what was hidden there, as fear sent him rushing back upstairs, leaving the scene untouched but unforgettable. And as police began asking questions, the details slowly came together. The name Jared surfacing again, the same man who lived upstairs, the same man connected to the missing girl whose face was now circulating online. And as officers approached, they needed to know, was Ashley inside? Was she somewhere in that building? Or had something already gone horribly wrong? And witnesses began to speak, recalling a young woman seen just days earlier, matching Ashley's description, her appearance noted in fragments, a white sweater, black leggings, distinctive boots. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just an ordinary encounter that in hindsight carried an unbearable weight. Because she hadn't seemed afraid, hadn't shown any signs of distress, and yet she was now missing, and her last known moments of her presence were slipping further out of reach. As one account revealed, she had arrived in a Ford Focus, her car still tied to the scene. And then came another detail, one that lingered uneasily when Jared later asked for help unlocking that same vehicle, casually explaining the keys were inside, as if nothing was wrong, as if everything was normal. And though the car appeared messy, nothing immediately stood out to those who saw it. Because sometimes the most chilling truths hide in plain sight, overlooked in the moment, only to become critical later. And as each piece of information surfaced slowly, painfully, the picture began to form, pulling everyone closer to a reality far more disturbing than anyone had first imagined. In the final moments before the truth began to surface, even the smallest details carried a weight no one could yet fully understand, as a neighbor recalled giving up on any real conversation with Jared, dismissing his behavior as the fog of drugs, until something far more unsettling came to light, a message sent days earlier, quietly instructing that if anyone came looking for him, his presence should be denied. A request that at the time seemed strange but not alarming, yet in hindsight felt like a warning no one recognized soon enough. And as officers made their way into the basement, stepping carefully into darkness with only their flashlights guiding them, the air itself seemed heavy, thick with something unspoken, until almost immediately their beams caught sight of a large canvas bag resting at the bottom of the stairs, and what they saw next changed everything. Thin trails of blood slowly seeping out from beneath it, spreading just enough to confirm what no one wanted to say out loud. And when one officer cautiously leaned in, noticing a slight opening in the material, the glimpse of human skin inside erased any remaining doubt, prompting an immediate withdrawal as the scene was secured. Because in that instant, the situation was no longer a missing person case, but something far more devastating, even though the full scope of what had happened was still unknown. And as word began to spread beyond that basement, confusion and disbelief took hold among those closest to Ashley, messages circulating, fragments of information colliding until one reached a friend who could barely process it, asking in disbelief if what had been found could possibly be her. And even then, the mind resisted, searching for any explanation that might be untrue, clinging to hope despite the growing evidence, insisting it could not be Ashley, that it had to be someone else, because the alternative was too painful to accept. And her mother held on to that same fragile thread, repeating over and over that there was one way to know for sure, one detail that could never be mistaken.
Her eyes, believing that if she could just see her, she would know instantly. Yet the response she received was one no parent should ever hear, that there were no identifying parts, nothing intact that could provide immediate confirmation, only absence where certainty should have been. And in that moment, the reality of the situation deepened into something even more unbearable as the need for answers became overwhelming. A desperate urge to reach her daughter, to find her, to bring her home, even if the truth waiting there would change everything forever. And while that emotional storm unfolded outside, inside the apartment above, officers were moving swiftly, entering Jared's space with caution, calling out as they advanced, only to find him there, appearing as though he had just been sleeping, a detail that felt almost surreal against the chaos surrounding him. And as they looked around, the condition of the apartment told its own story, items scattered without order, a sense of disruption that could not be ignored. And then there was the kitchen floor, where a strange stain stretched across the surface, several feet in length, partially covered in a white powder that seemed out of place, an attempt perhaps to conceal or alter something that had already happened. And as investigators continued their search, the discoveries became increasingly disturbing, each one adding another layer to a picture that was quickly turning into something horrific: a torso recovered from the basement, personal belongings connected to Ashley, and then one of the most chilling findings of all, a simple brown shipping box, the kind delivered every day without a second thought, now holding something unimaginable: her arms and legs placed inside, while still missing were the hands, the feet, and the head, leaving investigators with the grim reality that identification would not be immediate, intensifying the urgency that now drove every decision. And from the very beginning, all signs pointed in one direction, making Jared the primary suspect. His presence, his actions, and the evidence surrounding him forming a pattern that was impossible to ignore. And as he was taken into custody, there was a brief moment where answers seemed within reach. As he was brought into an interview room, the atmosphere controlled, almost routine at first, with small talk exchanged, references made to his earlier visit to the police department, where he had attempted to address what he claimed to have seen online, acknowledging that he knew he had been identified as the last person seen with Ashley, presenting himself as concerned, as someone simply trying to understand what was happening. Yet, even in those early moments, there was a noticeable caution in his words, a careful distance, and when the conversation shifted toward the possibility of discussing the situation further, he quickly drew a line, invoking his right to an attorney, making it clear he would not answer questions, effectively ending the interview almost as soon as it began. And with that, any immediate insight into what had happened was cut off, leaving investigators to rely entirely on the evidence, and what they already had was deeply troubling, because without key identifying features, confirmation of the victim's identity remained incomplete, forcing the investigation to move quickly on multiple fronts. And so, the focus shifted to retracing Jared's steps, building a timeline through whatever records they could obtain, starting with his financial activity, which soon revealed a pattern that raised even more concern, leading them to a local convenience store he had visited repeatedly over a short period of time, sometimes using cash, other times a card, purchasing the same item again and again, ammonia, behavior that, in isolation, might have meant little, but in the context of everything else felt deeply significant. And when surveillance footage from the store was reviewed, it showed him moving through the area in the early morning hours, carrying items that he would later discard into a trash bin outside, an act that might have gone unnoticed if not for what investigators would eventually find inside. Because when they searched that bin, they uncovered critical evidence: latex gloves, clothing belonging to him, items belonging to Ashley, including her purse and identification, and most telling of all, a pair of pants stained with her blood, even bearing his name tag, a detail that left little room for doubt. And as these pieces were brought together, the sequence of events began to take shape in a way that was both methodical and deeply disturbing, pointing back to the apartment, to that kitchen floor where it now appeared Ashley had been killed before her body was moved, dragged a short distance into the bathroom, where the bathtub became the site of something unimaginable, a place where an attempt was made to dismantle not just a body, but the evidence of a life. And as technology played its role, investigators turned to cell phone records, mapping movements, establishing locations, tracing his path beyond the apartment. And what they found added another dimension to the investigation, as it revealed travel that extended beyond the immediate area, drawing attention to a location connected to him in a different way, a place tied to family, to familiarity. And once that connection was made, the next step became clear, leading investigators to prepare for yet another search, one that would take them to his parents' home, where they would continue following the trail, determined to uncover every piece of the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to face. The evidence that emerged from Jared's apartment painted a picture so horrific it was almost impossible to grasp, beginning with a reciprocating saw hidden beneath a couch in the living room, the kind of tool designed to cut through long bones. And as investigators examined it, the gruesome reality became undeniable: flesh and hair clinging to the blade, later confirmed through DNA to belong to Ashley, making it the single most damning piece of physical evidence in the case. And this discovery shifted the entire investigation into overdrive, connecting not only Jared, but his family to actions that were now impossible to ignore. Because as detectives dug deeper, it became clear that James Chance, a retired police officer living in Holland with his wife and possibly his brother, Conrad, had knowledge of what had happened, supported by evidence showing several items: Ashley's limbs contained in an Amazon box, a mop and bucket filled with gloves and cleaning supplies, all emitting a horrible stench, had been moved from Jared's apartment into the Chance family vehicle, driven across town, including to the police station and Costco, and then returned to Jared's house, demonstrating active participation in attempting to hide the crime. And yet, when confronted, the family remained defensive, claiming they had not committed the crime, insisting their son had acted alone, framing themselves as victims of a system that, in their view, had unfairly targeted them, their outrage palpable, with accusations that the investigation felt almost like persecution, an almost ideological attack on their character, as if the legal system itself were oppressive. And when the questioning turned to the specifics of what Jared had told them, the accounts became even more disturbing, as his mother recalled him claiming there had been an accident, that he and Ashley had been drinking and playing with a gun, and somehow in the chaos it discharged, striking Ashley, though he insisted he would never have killed anyone intentionally, framing the shooting as an accident caused by panic and inexperience rather than malice. And in the same breath, he admitted to dismembering her body, distributing the parts, attempting to conceal evidence in ways that no rational person could imagine, leaving investigators piecing together where each limb had been placed, with critical details about the head, hands, and feet initially unknown. And his father's attempts to shield him only added to the complexity, playing the role of a concerned parent while deflecting responsibility, insisting he did not know the full extent, yet his words and gestures, yelling at officers, insisting they were making a mistake, claiming Jared had done nothing wrong, coincided with the horrifying fact that Ashley's arms and legs were literally in the family vehicle outside the police station at that very moment, a grotesque snapshot of complicity captured in real time. And after they left the station, the items were returned to Jared's home, the smell of decomposition faint that unmistakable, leaving investigators certain that the entire family had been involved in moving and hiding evidence, attempting to sanitize a crime scene that was already irrevocably tainted. And even in casual conversations, Ms. Chance's evasions, claiming she did not want to know the contents of the box, could not erase the reality that they had participated in this cover-up. And as the story unfolded publicly, the scale of the crime and the familial involvement shocked the community, exposing a network of deception, denial, and panic that allowed a heinous act to remain hidden for as long as it did, all centered around the 29-year-old Jared Chance, accused of dismembering Ashley Young, whose remains were still being searched for, each discovery layering additional horror onto a narrative that had already stunned investigators and the public alike. And as the press began to document the case, reporters like Heather Walker of Wood TV 8 captured every revelation, noting the chilling details of how a routine investigation escalated into something unimaginable. And even when contacting Jared directly through the jail, he remained engaged, speaking with a reporter in a way that underscored both the calculated composure and the terrifying detachment with which he had carried out his actions, a final haunting reminder of how quickly normal life had been shattered and how a single night had transformed from an ordinary evening into the center of a crime that would reverberate through everyone involved for years to come. The courtroom was heavy with tension. Each detail of Ashley's death laid bare for everyone to see, as people struggled to comprehend how a bright, loving young woman could be reduced to pieces, her life cut short in the most unimaginable way. And even when questioned, Jared remained almost completely unreadable, offering nothing that could clarify what happened, pausing on the phone or in court as if the weight of his own actions had silenced him, yet carefully avoiding any admission that could incriminate him, a wall of emotionless composure that frustrated prosecutors, families, and friends alike. And as the trial began, it was clear from the outset that this case would test not only the limits of the law, but the endurance of those forced to relive the trauma, as the plea deal he had refused would have required him to explain his actions, a refusal that left Ashley's mother furious and determined not to listen to any attempts to blame her daughter or fabricate excuses. And in court, Jared's demeanor remained chilling, a blank wall through every motion, every exchange, while the prosecution methodically presented evidence, noting that although Ashley's death was ruled a homicide, first-degree murder could not be proven without clear evidence of premeditation. And so the trial moved forward under the charge of second-degree murder, a process requiring jurors to carefully weigh 260 exhibits and testimony from more than 20 witnesses, each piece contributing to a narrative that was almost impossible to hear without feeling the weight of horror, beginning with the brown cardboard box found in Jared's apartment containing her arms and legs stripped of hands and feet, a gruesome display that underscored the incomprehensible nature of the crime. And as testimony unfolded, the medical examiner would later explain that Ashley had suffered blunt force trauma and a gunshot to the head, injuries inflicted from the neck up, while the torso and limbs showed no fatal wounds, painting a grim picture of the sequence of events and the methodical brutality involved. And in presenting these facts, the prosecution reminded the jury that mutilation alone did not equate to murder, emphasizing the need for careful reasoning over vengeance. And that distinction framed the trial, as jurors were asked to consider whether Jared's actions directly caused Ashley's death or only compounded the horror afterward. A subtle but critical legal nuance that demanded clear, rational thought in the face of visceral emotion. And as the first witness was called, Christine Young, Ashley's mother, was sworn in, embodying both heartbreak and courage, forced to recount the night her daughter vanished, the discovery of the evidence, and her efforts to find the truth, while maintaining composure under the piercing gaze of the defendant who had destroyed her family's life. And when asked to identify her daughter, she did so unequivocally, providing the jury with a deeply personal and painful confirmation of the victim, describing Ashley as kind, loving, infectious in personality, someone who gave freely, who would sacrifice for others,
painting a vivid picture of the life stolen. And yet, even as she spoke with sorrow, there was anger and resolve in her voice, recounting her voicemail to Jared, the one desperate attempt to reach him after realizing something was terribly wrong, leaving him a message that demanded answers, insisting he come forward, a voice trembling but firm, knowing that the truth, no matter how painful, needed to be confronted. And as she recounted that moment, the courtroom felt the weight of every parent's nightmare, the helplessness, the horror, the gut-wrenching knowledge that a loved one had been taken in the most brutal and unfathomable way, while the jury absorbed every word, every exhibit, and every detail, balancing the raw emotional reality against the legal standards of proof, understanding that their task was not vengeance, but justice, to determine, beyond a reasonable doubt, the role Jared Jantz played in the death of Ashley Young, and to navigate the complexities of intent, causation, and the calculated acts that followed, all while witnessing the incredible strength of a mother confronting the man who had murdered her child and dissected her body, standing resolute despite grief, anger, and shock, helping to guide the court toward a clear understanding of the human and legal truths at the heart of this case, the scale of horror juxtaposed against the need for reason, and ensuring that Ashley's story, her life, her character, and the devastating consequences of Jared's actions were fully recognized in the pursuit of justice. The courtroom was charged with an almost unbearable tension, each detail of Ashley Young's murder and dismemberment laid bare, forcing everyone to confront a reality so cruel it was difficult to process. As Christine Young's voice carried across the room, trembling yet resolute, recounting the moments she called Jared, demanding answers for her missing daughter, and then describing his evasive, contradictory responses, claiming Ashley had simply gone to pick up her phone or return to work, a story that made no sense to anyone who knew her schedule or her life. And as the trial unfolded, the involvement of Jared's family emerged, with his brother Conrad testifying about moving items with their parents from Holland to Grand Rapids, reluctant to speak about his own brother, but compelled to reveal the sequence of events that led to Ashley's death, including a terrifying incident days prior when Jared had brandished a gun carelessly, pointing it at Conrad and mimicking pulling the trigger, while Ashley admonished him, showing the recklessness and danger that pervaded their household. And testimony confirmed that Jared had boasted about being able to get away with murder, claiming knowledge passed down from his father about cleaning up blood, a revelation that underscored both the premeditation and the chilling mindset of a man capable of unspeakable acts, while witnesses like Mario Nelson were credited with providing critical evidence that ultimately led investigators to uncover the crime, his observations and cooperation helping to piece together the timeline and locate Ashley's remains. And as the prosecution laid out their case, they focused not on the method of death, which remained uncertain, but on causation, challenging the jury to consider whether anyone in their right mind, uninvolved in a death, would proceed to dismember a body, place limbs in boxes, and distribute evidence across multiple locations, a rhetorical argument designed to bridge the gap between emotion and reason. And it worked, demonstrating the meticulous cruelty of Jared's actions while emphasizing that the act of dismembering alone pointed to involvement in her death, compelling jurors to weigh the totality of the evidence against the improbability of innocence. And yet, the case was not without complexity, because critical elements, Ashley's head, her hands, and her feet, were never recovered, leaving certain forensic questions unanswered, and requiring jurors to rely on circumstantial and testimonial evidence to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. While video footage of Ashley and Jared together before the tragedy reminded everyone that this had begun as ordinary moments, ordinary interactions, laughter, and casual connection, underscoring the shocking transition from normalcy to horror. And when deliberations began, the jury took time, reviewing each piece of evidence with care, ensuring that their decision reflected both the facts and the law, ultimately returning with a unanimous verdict finding Jared Jantz guilty of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, mutilation of a corpse, and concealing
concealing the death of an individual, a decision that would lead to sentencing and bring a measure of closure to a case marked by extraordinary cruelty. And when that sentencing occurred, Christine's grief and fury were palpable as she stood before the court with the box of her daughter's ashes, speaking directly to the man who had destroyed her family, expressing the depth of her heartbreak and anger in words that cut through the courtroom, declaring that Jared had chosen to execute, dismember, and scatter Ashley, her only child, leaving her to grieve without the physical presence of the daughter she loved, forcing her to hug a box of ashes as a stand-in for the child she had lost, a haunting testament to the cruelty inflicted and the enduring pain left in the wake of a life so violently stolen. And in that moment, the legal system, the evidence, and the courtroom all converged, bearing witness to a mother's unimaginable loss and a community's confrontation with the darkest capacities of human behavior. While the memory of Ashley Young remained vivid, a bright life extinguished too soon, and the consequences for Jared Chance firmly established, the verdict and sentencing providing a legal reckoning for actions that had scarred so many, ensuring that while he would face punishment, the memory of Ashley and the grief of her mother would never be forgotten. The courtroom fell into a heavy, almost unbearable silence as Christine Young spoke, her voice trembling yet resolute, recounting the unbearable pain that had filled her life since Ashley was taken, admitting that she cried every day, 7 days a week, her mind a relentless loop of grief, haunted by voicemails and videos replaying the sound of her daughter's laugh, the essence of her spirit. Yet even in that grief, she made it clear that nothing could ever erase Ashley from their hearts, that her spirit remained alive with every memory, every story, and every act of love she had shared. And as the sentence was read, the full weight of justice settled over the courtroom. Jared Chance, the man who had carried out acts so cruel and calculated that only a psychopath could, had been sentenced to a minimum of 100 years and a maximum of 200 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections, deliberately ensuring he would not be eligible for parole until an impossible age of 130, a legal decision designed to reflect the severity of his crimes and the danger he posed to society, a punishment born not only from the loss of life, but from the deliberate and horrifying nature of his actions. And yet, the story of the family's trauma did not end there, as the legal consequences for his family unfolded differently. His mother ultimately pleading guilty to her role in the cover-up, his father going to trial and being found guilty as an accessory after the fact, while a jury hung on one count of perjury, each conviction adding to the complex tapestry of accountability. And through it all, Christine's words captured both the devastation and the enduring bond she shared with her daughter, emphasizing that while the body could be gone, the love, the friendship, and the connection they had would never be broken, that Ashley's spirit would live on in every person who had loved her, and that the memory of her bright, generous, and joyful presence would never be surrendered, a testament to resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. And as the courtroom emptied, the echo of her voice lingered, carrying a message of love, of defiance, and of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child, reminding everyone present that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can endure, can honor life lost, and can demand that justice, though delayed, be served in full measure, ensuring that Ashley's story, her life, her character, and the depth